very much indeed.
The Honourable Chief Justice, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Ustad Lubrani, UNDP, the Solicitor General, also Chairman of Legal Aid Commission, Commissioner of Correctional Services, Commissioner of Police, the DPP, Chairman of the Human Rights Commission, Director of Legal Aid Commission, of course, honourable members of the Judiciary also. Bulubinaka, a very good morning. When you have four esteemed people speaking before you, don't really need to say much. But I'd like to just very quickly highlight at a philosophical level why this occasion today is very, very important. The reason why it is very, very important, ladies and gentlemen, is because this has been the quest of government over the past 8-9 years to build strong institutions. Unfortunately in Fiji, we've had a history where institutions have actually taken a backstage to personalities. Institutions have taken a backstage to politicization of institutions, where ethnicity, religious considerations, provincial considerations have actually held sway. And as a result of that, we have seen a deterioration in the foundations of the institutions. Indeed, many institutions did not even have a foundation. It was more of a facade. And this is why it is very critical. I'll give you an example, because what it actually led to was more about form over substance. So, somebody would come along from overseas and say, do you have a legal aid commission? Yes, we do. We have an office in Suva, and Lautoka, and Lambasa, wonderful, and the box is ticked. That was the situation until 2007. So nobody else talked about anything else. Do you have a parliament? Yes, we have a parliament, we have elections, wonderful, and you tick the box. Do you have a judiciary? Yes, we have a judiciary, we tick the box. The reality though, ladies and gentlemen, is that when you have these institutions, when you have these systems, you must ensure that there is substance in these institutions. You must ensure that the processes, that the delivery systems are actually in a very tangible and practical manner reaching out to the very people you're supposed to reach out to. So the fact is, as the Chair of the Legal Aid Commission has highlighted, we now have something like 16 odd Legal Aid Commission officers. It was ridiculous to expect a person living in Raki to travel all the way to Suva or to Lautoka to get access to some legal aid information. It is ridiculous for somebody living in Tavyuni to go all the way to Lambasa or west still come to Suva to get access to legal aid information. That situation has changed. Similarly, what we also need to ensure is that the various tools are given to these institutions. Today, the judiciary in Fiji, led by the Honourable Chief Justice, and I must acknowledge publicly, and it's generally not said quite a lot because we do not necessarily get the occasion to say these things. Otherwise, people would say that there is a blurring of the lines between the three arms of government. But I'd like to publicly acknowledge the Honourable Chief Justice, who has been Chief Justice since 2008, through some very, very trying times. He's had to run a judiciary that was politically interfered with by people from outside. We had members of the profession who could not join the judiciary because there was a fear of travel bans, not only on those individuals, but their family members and their uncles and aunts and everybody else. The reality though is there was a lack of understanding. Whatever political differences there may be at a bilateral or multilateral basis, the reality is a country continues to function. People get raped, houses get robbed, there are contractual issues, there's theft, there's larceny, there are human rights breaches. All of these need a forum, an independent forum, to have redresses done. A country does not stop. And I have to publicly acknowledge the Chief Justice for helping us through those trying times. And he held his fort, despite all the pressure, despite sometimes the ridicule. And similarly, we have similar situations in our police force and the correction services, as the Honourable Chief Justice highlighted. As somebody working in the prosecution's office a few years ago, I remember there was a group of judges who actually went down to the prison system, where people even being held in remand were being held with people who were convicted criminals, where you had 5 or 6 people sharing a toilet, where you had people, if they were put in a cell, you would automatically within 2 or 3 days get a skin disease. This was the reality of what happened previously. So the reason why I'm highlighting the supposed negative things is that we have to ensure, ladies and gentlemen, that this is work in progress. We have to ensure that we do not deteriorate back into that type of situation again. But also to highlight to the honourable members of the judiciary, to the Commissioner of Police, to the Commissioner of Prisons, the DPP's office, that it is very critical and you must jealously guard the independence of all of these institutions. They cannot be interfered with. They cannot be politically pressurized into doing whatever is the will, the political sway, whether internationally or even within the country itself. We had issues of forum shopping previously. That does not exist anymore. We had issues of court clerks taking bribes. We had issues of people who perhaps were attending to cases simply because they knew each other. So the strengthening, ladies and gentlemen, of the institutions is very, very critical. And I'd like to thank the European Union for this assistance they have provided, because it goes to demonstrate that the European Union is very much part and parcel of the way of thinking that government has, and that is to ensure that we take an apolitical view of building strong institutions. We must ensure, ladies and gentlemen, as highlighted, that it is ridiculous for somebody who is living in Laos to wait for 18 months for his or her case to be heard. We have rural courts. So these are the realities of modern day Fiji. So what we are also saying, I've got a few notes over here, and I wanted to highlight again, it is very, very important that when we take an approach to access to justice, we also have to understand the constitutional changes that have taken place in Fiji. Previously in Fiji, you only had the vertical application of rights, and those rights, therefore, were limited to your ability to only apply it against the state. We now have what we call the horizontal application of rights. Rights are now enforceable against private bodies, private individuals, clubs, societies, which opens up a whole plethora of rights that was hitherto unavailable in Fiji. It also means that there's a lot more work for the Human Rights Commission. It also means that there is a new developed jurisprudence within the Fijian judiciary. Many of these rights have not, in fact, been, tested. We do not necessarily have the case law. We also have, ladies and gentlemen, one may talk about access to justice. And traditionally in Fiji, and traditionally partners have only talked about access to justice within the context of civil and political rights. But what is really critical also, of course, and equally critical, I should say, is socio-economic rights. I mean, as Ustad Lubrani talked about the political economy approach, we must ensure that socio-economic rights are also equally enforceable. Because you may say, for example, that a person has all these rights available to them, civil and political rights, but if they do not have socio-economic rights, then sometimes these rights are rendered useless in a practical and tangible manner. And that is what is also critical for us to understand. And in fact, I'm very, very glad that the Fijian Constitution has those rights enshrined in the Constitution. Whether it's access to basic food, water, sanitation, housing, right to employment, the environmental rights, the specific rights for people with disability. All of these rights, ladies and gentlemen, are very, very critical. So it's within this context that we are hoping that, as was highlighted by the Solicitor General, that now the Legal Aid Commission, in fact, is giving views or giving a legal opinion and actually writing of wills to individuals. Why should writing of wills or having a will should only be the domain or the premise of those people who are wealthy? Why can't ordinary Podiasi, who may be a hotel worker and have a car and a house, perhaps a housing authority house, be able to write a will? And generally, if you do a check of that, that's what you'll find. It's only the rich people who can write wills. People who are poor or Low-income families do not have a will. Most people die interstate, so all go running off to the public trustee. It takes years for those matters to be resolved. So these are some fundamental issues that the Legal Aid Commission is addressing. And we hope that in the implementation of this, as I mentioned to the European Union Ambassador, when we are discussing this access to justice, is that we are very, very keen on ensuring that the application of this program is done in an apolitical manner. The civil society groups and the NGOs, and they have a very pivotal role in terms of delivery of services. They play a very key role. But they must also ensure that when they deliver these services, it is done in a manner that is apolitical. It is done in a manner that is not, has got some sort of ethnic or religious or provincial sway to it. And that is difficult. When you have had a society, when you have had a country, when you have specific policies, when you have specific constitutions that actually had a particular skewed system, sometimes it's very hard to wrangle yourself out of that. So we now have a new era in which we can apply this and apply all of these policies, apply these programs in a neutral manner. And that's what really needs to be done. And in fact, that would be the success of this program. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge all those people who have contributed to this, the European Union. Thank you very much. We look forward to working with them. As you know, that we have a program with them in respect of sugar. We hope to refine that, and we hope that will be the next signing agreement that we'll have very soon. We also would like to acknowledge the UNDP for the assistance, and of course they'll be the key implementing agency. We look forward to working with them, and I'm sure that they will have a very fruitful contribution for this. I was sitting there and I thought everybody's looking very, very serious. You have the Chief Justice and you have the Solicitor General and you have the European Union Ambassador. I just wanted to share a small story because I'm not very good at telling jokes. So I thought I'd tell you the story. This is regarding access to information. I remember that back in 2008, it was, when we opened up the bar, officially opened the bar legal aid office. And, excuse me. And then we actually went on the same day and delivered a new vehicle to the Attorney General's office in Lautoka. They had a vehicle that was about 28 years old, so the car would drive in one direction, the driver would be in the other. So they were very pleased, and we actually had a bit of a grog session at the end of it in the Lautoka office. And we have been since then talking about Freedom of Information Act, or access to information. So we were just sitting around and having a bit of a Talmud session, and so I talked about this freedom of information, or access to information, and I said, we want to put in place a law. Now, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, that bill is before Parliament. So somebody said, what is actually, access to information? I said, well, it's like, so I gave an example. I said, for example, if a group of us apply for a taxi permit, and we apply for a taxi permit, and this person gets the taxi permit, but the others don't, get the taxi permit, they must have the right to know why Mr. X got the taxi permit and they didn't. You should be able to know what was the decision-making process that led to that decision being made, and look at the documentation. And I said, that's very much part and parcel of democracy. I said, democracy is not simply about having elections, but things like legal aid access, freedom of information. The next day, there was an article, it happened to be the Fiji Times actually, there was an article in which there was a story that said that the Attorney General said, in order for everybody to have access to information, freedom of information, everybody must have a taxi permit. So it is actually a true story, you can check the newspaper. With those few words, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your presence here this morning. Thank you once again to the EU and all the others who have been involved.